At the end of February, Russian troops occupied Crimea, a peninsula on the Black Sea which belonged to Ukraine. The move sparked a massive international crisis. NATO is discussing a boost in its military presence in Eastern Europe amid fears that Russia may invade the entire eastern part of Ukraine. The world seems to have suddenly time-warped back to the Cold War. How did we get here? Ukraine is a divided country. The east is home to a large Russian-speaking population, but the western and central regions, including the capital, Kiev, feel closer to Europe. Last November, Viktor Yanukovych, Ukraine's pro-Russian premier, refused to sign a cooperation agreement with the EU. People in Kiev felt deeply damaged by this decision and took to the streets. Violent protests went on for weeks. Around 100 people died in the clashes, thousands were injured. Yanukovych eventually fled to Russia and protesters appointed a new interim government. New elections were proclaimed for May, but the parliament also discussed measures that were perceived by some as harmful to the country's Russian-speaking population, such as lowering the official status of their language. Moscow condemned the uprising and denied legitimacy to the interim government. On the 27th of February, soldiers with no insignia appeared out of the blue in Crimea, one of Ukraine's regions with the highest concentration of Russians, which also hosts a base of the Russian fleet. They occupied airports and other key infrastructures, isolating the few Ukrainian forces in their bases. The Kremlin has never officially admitted to have sent its army in, but it didn't take long for everybody to understand that the gunmen were Russian soldiers. In the following weeks, they gradually took control of the entire peninsula. Ukrainian troops generally avoided confrontation and were eventually withdrawn. But in some cases, the standoff got pretty bad, as when a group of Ukrainian servicemen tried to force a Russian roadblock. Shots were fired in the air. It was a miracle that a massacre was avoided. After a referendum held in mid-March with pro-Kremlin forces patrolling the streets, Putin signed the official accession of Crimea into the Russian Federation. He says he wants to protect the interests of Ukraine's Russians, but his latest moves have more to do with his will not to lose influence on the region, also reminding the world, as well as his own economically struggling nation, that Russia is back as a big global power. The US and the EU consider the annexation illegitimate and have responded with targeted sanctions against a few dozens of Russian officials. But the situation could get even worse. Thousands of Russian troops have taken position on the border with Ukraine, allegedly ready to occupy another chunk of the country. This crisis may well not be over.